Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Guys, lots of stuff happening over the last 24 hours. We've got Putin warning of retaliation for a strike on Crimea. Then we've got reports of a NATO aircraft shot down in and around the same area. Then we've got Russia imposing a no-fly zone over the Black Sea. Now we've got these attacks in Dagestan. We've got the F-16s and the problems they're having with the pilots. And we've also got something that's really funny to me. We've got mainstream media catching up now. They're about a week behind what we've been saying on this channel. So guys, let's just get right into it. So Russia warned of a retaliation yesterday after US ATACMS Army Tactical Missile System killed 4 people and injured 151 people, as we know so far, in Crimea. Now, these targets were basically the Ukrainians targeting Russian radar systems, Russian old radar systems, and for whatever reason, there were people on a beach, and unfortunately people on the beach have died. Now, let's remember this now, guys, from the Russian perspective. Imagine you've got, imagine somewhere in the UK, in the United States, a beach area, you've got people sunbathing, enjoying the summer, and then all of a sudden a load of American missiles come over and start killing people. That's the reality from the Russian perspective. Now, we can put whatever slant or twist on that, we're taking out a Russian target, it doesn't matter. That's the reality from the Russian perspective. And guys, I understand, if the Russians didn't start this war in the first place, none of this had happened. But, a lot of the Russians, they don't get access to this information. They are really spoon-fed a lot of their propaganda. So if you're a Russian then, or your perception is that you've got NATO operators, either United States, British, French special forces operating these weapon systems. Now, how are they operating them? Whether they're operating them by telling, if you're standing at the side of a Ukrainian and saying, right, mate, press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in there, press that green button, wait till that changes, and then press the red button. I don't know how these things work, guys, but you see where I'm going. So however this is working, it doesn't matter. The reality is, the perception from the Russians is that these weapon systems are being operated by NATO troops. So let me just read you a quick article here, guys, about what's happened. So in response to this, in response to Putin's retaliation threat, the Americans have come back, and Major Charlie Diaz, D-I-E-T-Z, I'll put the links in the description, guys. A Pentagon spokesperson said, they can't call him a spokesman anymore. A Pentagon spokesperson said, Ukraine makes its own targeting decisions and conducts its own military operations. Now, how do we feel about that? Do we think the Ukrainians are, they're using do you think Ukrainians have access to satellite communications, to satellite surveillance, to these high altitude drones? I don't know, because if they do have access to them, then why do we need to donate all this stuff? But anyway, a White House National Security Council spokesman said, any loss of civilian life was a tragedy. That certainly includes the thousands of innocent Ukrainians who've been killed by Russian forces since the Russian war of aggression began. And guys, on a personal note, it's what I just said, Russia is the aggressor here. But you've got to look at these things from the Russian perspective and think about the escalation now that's happening. Because the more these things happen, the more the Russians will be, and I mean the rank and file Russian civilians now, the more these people will be pro-war in Ukraine. They'll be saying, all right, you've killed some of our people on a beach, we want to send missiles onto you, and these things just escalate out of control. And this is, we really run the risk right now of this air war escalating into a totally new dimension of warfare. It was certainly what we've seen in Ukraine. So today, this morning, I got a message from my friend in Ukraine. It was a telegram, it was actually some screenshots of a telegram message. It was in Russian, I didn't understand it. I said, what's happening? He said, a Mark MQ-4C Global Hawks being shot down over the Black Sea. Now, these things, you know, it's common knowledge these things are operating in and around the Black Sea. They're providing intelligence gathering, surveillance, you know, reconnaissance, all this sort of stuff from these high altitude platforms that, you know, HALE stands for high altitude long endurance. So these aircraft now are providing eyes and ears to the Ukrainians. Now, if what we've just said is true, that the Russians are going to retaliate, it makes perfect sense to me that they would retaliate by taking out the system that enabled these weapons to, you know, to fire. Because if you guys, the way this used to happen in the olden days is you would have to have a forward forward observation officer, FOO, forward observation officer. So you would have to have somebody, some special forces guys. They would sneak in, they would move. You know, they would move in darkness, they would lay up in the day, they would find a hide, and they'd have binoculars on a target. They'd then radio back to the artillery with the grid reference of where these rockets need to land. The artillery would then fire the artillery. Then the observers would say either come north, south, east or west, 200 meters, 300 meters, whatever, and they would bring them onto target. Well, that's all over now. This is all done by drones. So to take out the drone would be to stop the incoming attacks, because if you can't see what you're firing at, you're definitely not going to hit anything. So that would make perfect sense for the, you know, for the Russians to take this out. Now, something that's really interesting to me is that the reports are that a MiG-31 took this thing down. Now, for those of you who don't know, the MiG-31 was built as a high altitude interceptor. I believe it was built to try and intercept the SR-71. This was all before the days of satellites, you know, and it was thought that an aircraft travelling fast enough could fly right over Russia, take a load of pictures, you'd know what was happening. And the MiG-31 and I think the MiG-25, I think one of them is called the Fox Bat and the other one's called the Fox Hound. I'm not sure which one's which. But they have a really high altitude. I didn't even think these things were still in service, but apparently they are. So it's interesting that one of these things have shot down the drone, which would make perfect sense. Now, my other question is, how high are these things actually operating? Because when we think of these drones, because people talk about drones all the time, these big MQ-4 drones, they're like 140 million or something. They're ridiculously expensive. And also these little quadcopters that are like, I don't know, $500. People call them drones, and when you're trying to visualize them, you kind of can't put these in the same thing. So these high altitude systems, these are the things that this, you know, the laser, the Dragonfire laser, it was built to take down these big, you know, these big drones, these expensive ones. So that's what it was built for. Now, the MiG-31 that's taken it down, it's absolutely capable of doing that. Remember, these are unconfirmed reports at the moment. I'll put some links in the in the description of where I've been getting this information from, and a few people have been, you know, a few media outlets are claiming it now. So only time will tell whether this is admitted or not. The reality is we don't know, and time will tell. What's also interesting is that the Russians are now planning a no-fly zone, and that's looking like it's going to encompass the whole Black Sea area. If the Russians do impose a no-fly zone, that means that they have to enforce it. And if they enforce it, that means that they have to shoot aircraft out of the sky. So if they impose this no-fly zone, guys, this could be a Cuban Missile Crisis 2.0, in the sense that you've got the Russians this time imposing a restriction, and the Americans and NATO, if they say, okay, it's a no-fly zone, they're going to lose face. You know, it's going to be, right, okay, we're not going there because you're going to shoot. Where else are the Russians going to impose a no-fly zone? However, if they put their aircraft in there and they start losing their aircraft, could we see an air war, you know, an air war escalate really quickly in that area? So how are they going to enforce it? Who's going to enforce it? Is the air war coming? Remember, I've been saying this for a while. We've been seeing the early seeds of this, of this air war. You know, the Ukrainians have been taking out Russian air defense systems. They've been taking out the radar, the early warning systems. And all this sort of stuff you would do before an air war. Remember now, we've got the, I'll read something in a minute from the Kiev Post, but remember, we've got these F-16s that are going to be absolutely key. Remember what I've said, I don't think these F-16s are ever going to be flown from Ukraine. I think they're going to be flown from potentially Poland or another NATO country. And what I'm seeing now is, I'm seeing this, this system that we're not going to even see Ukrainian pilots in these F-16s. We're actually going to see NATO pilots in these F-16s. Remember what I've said. I've said, it's going to be very difficult to identify whether an F-16 leaving Poland is going for an offensive mission, on a defensive mission, whether it's flying on a training mission, whether it's flying into a Ukrainian airbase as a replacement for an aircraft that's being damaged. It becomes very difficult to identify what's happening, and the water is very murky now with this air defences and with this air war that's going to happen at some point. So let me just read you quickly from the Kiev Post. And of course, guys, all this sort of stuff's going to be in the in the description. So the title is 30 Pilots Grounded and Worse, the sad truth about Ukrainian F-16s. Significant movements, the second paragraph. From a well-placed, unnamed US government source, Ukraine does in fact have 30 qualified pilots to enter the US F-16 training pipeline, as reported earlier this week from Ukraine. With recent graduation of F-16 pilots from the US and those from training sites in Europe, Ukraine is likely to have between 15 and 20 pilots for 60 aircraft. That is a horrible aircrew to aircraft ratio. So guys, let's just think about that then. They're going to have 15 to 20 pilots for 60 aircraft. Now that, I think this is optimistic. There isn't enough pilots for these aircraft. And from what I'm hearing from my sources who are in this sphere, the pilots that they're sending on these training missions, they're not up to minimum standard. So they're going, they're going to learn how to work with a fast jet. And they don't meet the minimum requirements to do that. Kind of like if you go for a HGV driver's test without passing your normal driver's test, it's going to put you in a disadvantage. Yes, of course, you can get in a HGV and you can drive it, but you're going to be unsafe. It's going to take a lot longer. Because it takes a lot longer, the lesson plans have to be stretched out. You've got other pilots that are not as don't need as much tuition. So the whole thing looks to me like the whole training is a bit of a disaster at the moment. Guys, when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at this as if from day one this looks like it was set up to fail, in the sense that if there's no pilots trained, then those pilots have to come from somewhere. Not only the pilots have to come from somewhere, but the ground crew have to come from somewhere. And this is why I said, and I've said this a long time ago, guys, all right? I'm confident I'm the first person to say this. The International Legion, so the International Legion of Foreign Fighters of Ukraine, I don't know the exact terminology of it, I think that will expand its ranks to be able to take in non-Ukrainians as pilots. So, for example, imagine you've just left the US Air Force and you've got, 25 years experience flying the F-16. That pilot would just be able to go straight into an F-16 and go. They wouldn't need any training at all. So these are the type of people that I think are going to be, people will be looking for them now, and they'll be looking for them to go into this legion. I think they will be funded by a non-government organisation, and they'll be there on a training mission. They will be there on some sort of, there'll be some sort of framework to support them. And these guys will be getting paid through that system, and they won't be getting paid a salary as such. They'll be getting paid a per diem. And it might be something like $1,000 a day or something. And they'll pay them that. For that money, it will be quite clear that that money is for accommodation, it's for food, it's for transport, it's for hotels and that sort of stuff. So the Ukrainians can say that everybody they've got are Ukrainian pilots, And the US government can say, or whatever government, can say, we are not paying any pilots. There are no US paid pilots, or you know where I'm going. Okay, they've got plausible deniability of the payment and of the deployability. And on an operational side, as long as these guys don't fly over Russia, even if they get shot down, how are anybody going to tell what nationality that pilot is? It's just not going to happen. So I think that's the way that these guys are moving forwards. And there's the same problem as well with the ground crew for these aircraft. You know, I'm told by my friends it takes 7 ground crew to service one aircraft. I don't know how long it takes. I guess, you know, you've got lots of things to take in, like did it take any damage, how much fuel's gone, how long has it been flying for, the parts and all the servicing schedules. All that sort of stuff needs to be taken into consideration. And guys, the more I think about this, the more it just seems almost impossible for Ukrainians to do this. Because with all the best will in the world, all this documentation will be in English. All these schedules will be built on a pretense of they already have a certain amount of experience before they go onto the F-16. So I think you're going to have the same thing with the F-16s. I think the F-16 crew are going to be joining some sort of international legion. So then the Ukrainians can say, we have no foreign NATO instructors, all ours are Ukrainian military. Which they will be, but they'll be funded by this NGO and it'll become very murky. So that's the reality of the situation, guys, all right? This air war really is coming, and it's coming anytime now, and things are just going to escalate so fast, it's going to be unbelievable. Wow, and if that wasn't enough, guys, we've got this, you know, what's been happening in Dagestan. I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. You know, from what I understand, there's been an attack in Dagestan. People have died. There's been an attack on 2 churches, 2 synagogues, and a police location. What I'm really worried about, and I've said this many, many times, is that this could be a sign of the things in the future. In the sense that we have a situation now in the world where instead of, you know, sending militaries into a country to do X, Y, and Z, we just pay criminal gangs. We radicalize people online, we give them some money, and we tell them to go and do something. You know, and I think this model, this network and this system, that could be duplicated anywhere in Europe, anywhere in the UK, anywhere in the United States, where we have people that do not, what's the words I'm looking for? Where we have people that do not subscribe to the culture of the country they're living in. Tell me, maybe we have maybe we have subcultures in the UK that are like that. Maybe there's subcultures in Europe. Maybe there's subcultures in the United States. But for your enemy nations, it makes perfect sense to pay people to do these attacks. And I'm just really worried that we're going to see more of these attacks, and we're going to see more innocent people, you know, losing their lives tragically. And guys, I don't know what the end is. I really don't. I just see this as a blueprint for things to come further down the line. Also, we've got, well, I'll put the link in the bio as well. So a couple of weeks ago, I think a week ago or something, I did a video about the Russian nuclear doctrine and how they're reviewing it, how they're looking to change it to, to make it easier for them to fire nuclear weapons. And again, I was quite clear, under no illusion, you know, if Vladimir Putin wants to fire all his nuclear weapons at once, it doesn't matter what the paperwork says. But what the paperwork does do, it gives everybody else a framework of understanding. Well, I think it was today that Sky News has come out and they've done an article and they're literally saying word for word what I said like last week or something about this thing. But guys, I will put all these links in the description so you guys can go check them out for yourself. But guys, that is all I've got for you this, I think it's morning. No, it's afternoon. That's all I've got for you this afternoon, guys. I'm going to mag to grid.